This is the MiG-29, a Soviet fighter jet born in the heart of the 1970s, conceived for one purpose: to dominate the skies. It was engineered to be a phantom of speed, an artist of agility, and a lethal predator in aerial combat. In its essence, this aircraft is a masterpiece of aerodynamic design, a pure expression of what it means to fly, turn, and fight. Today, these very same jets, relics of a bygone era, are being flown by Ukrainian pilots in a brutally modern war. But their mission has been twisted into something their creators never envisioned. They are no longer just dogfighters. Now, they must become surgical strikers, tasked with attacking long-range targets with pinpoint accuracy. And herein lies a monumental problem. This jet was built in the 1980s. Its avionics are analog, its systems are archaic, its computers have never even heard of GPS. So the critical question arises: how do you possibly make a 40-year-old machine, a product of the Cold War, compatible with brand-new, satellite-guided smart weapons? Well, the Ukrainians found an answer. And it is, at the same time, brilliantly simple and audaciously genius. To truly grasp the magnitude of their innovation, let me tell you an incredible story that unfolded in the early hours of a spring morning. It was approximately 5:45 a.m. on May 26th when a Ukrainian pilot settled into the cockpit of his MiG-29. He was preparing for a mission that, by any conventional military doctrine, was deemed impossible. His target was not just any military installation. It was a high-value command and control center belonging to the FSB, Russia's formidable security service. And this target was located deep within Russian territory. The specific objective? The Federal Security Service headquarters in Belgorod. Understand, we are not talking about a simple supply depot or a common military base. We are talking about the nerve center of Putin's intelligence services in that entire region, a target of immense strategic importance, and therefore one of the most heavily protected locations imaginable. And this is where our story takes a fascinating turn. The pilot was about to execute this daring strike using that 40-year-old MiG-29, carrying sophisticated French smart bombs that, theoretically, shouldn't even be able to communicate with the aircraft. But they did, and they worked perfectly. The secret to this impossible technological marriage was elegantly simple, almost absurdly so. It was an iPad, strapped firmly to the cockpit's instrument panel. Yes, a standard consumer-grade iPad. The kind you might use to watch Netflix, read a book, or browse the internet. This particular iPad, however, was running specialized Ukrainian-developed software that performed an incredible feat of digital translation. It acted as a bridge between two completely different technological eras. It took modern, satellite-based GPS targeting data and converted it into a language that the advanced French bombs could understand and execute. Think of it like this. It's as if you found an old Walkman from the 1980s and, through some clever engineering, made it stream music directly from Spotify. It sounds like science fiction, doesn't it? But Ukrainian engineers achieved the digital equivalent of this feat. The iPad received the target coordinates, utilized its own internal GPS receiver for precise navigation, and then processed and formatted this information into a data package that the bombs could use to guide themselves. What's truly staggering about this solution is the cost and time involved. A traditional military integration program to make a new weapon compatible with an old jet would take years of development and testing, costing tens, if not hundreds, of millions of dollars. The Ukrainian solution? It took a few weeks of brilliant software coding and the $500 price of a new tablet. Now let's return to our pilot. Because at 6:15 a.m., he was screaming across the Ukrainian landscape at an altitude of just 50 meters. He was flying so low that the powerful thrust from his jet's turbines was whipping the wheat fields into a frenzy and sending flocks of birds scattering in terror. There's a genius and brutally effective reason for flying this dangerously low, and it's rooted in the fundamental physics of our planet. Russian air defense systems, particularly the feared S-400, are among the most advanced in the world. They are designed to detect and eliminate targets from up to 400 kilometers away. But this incredible range is only effective if the radar can actually see the target. And this is where the curvature of the Earth becomes the pilot's greatest ally. No matter how powerful a radar is, it cannot see through the planet itself. At an altitude of just 50 meters, the radar horizon for a ground-based system is a mere 25 kilometers. This meant that for the vast majority of his approach, our pilot was completely invisible, flying under a natural shield provided by the Earth's own shape. He was a ghost, a whisper in the electronic ether. But he was also in a race against time. In precisely 3 minutes, he would have to make a choice: to abandon the safety of his invisibility and climb directly into the crosshairs of the enemy's most lethal defense systems. His aircraft was armed with 2 French-made AASM Hammer bombs, each weighing 250 kilograms. But to simply call this weapon a bomb is a profound understatement. The AASM Hammer is, in reality, a hybrid missile. Let me explain the difference. A standard unguided bomb just falls, following a predictable ballistic path. A more advanced JDAM uses fins and GPS to glide towards its target after being dropped. The French AASM, however, has its own rocket motor, and that changes everything. Once released from the aircraft, this rocket engine ignites, propelling the weapon at near supersonic speeds. This isn't just falling with style, it's powered flight. This motor extends its effective range to over 70 kilometers and gives it enough kinetic energy to punch through hardened, fortified targets. Each of these weapons costs more than a suburban house and can place its explosive payload through a specific window from 70 kilometers away. The margin for error, its circular error probable, is just 1 meter. This was the weapon of choice for this surgical strike. At 6:22 a.m., the pilot reached the critical point of the mission. He pulled back hard on the control stick, and the MiG-29 responded instantly, its nose pitching up at a steep 45-degree angle. The G-forces were immense, crushing him into his seat as the altimeter spun wildly. 1,000 meters, 2,000, 3,000. Suddenly, the cockpit's radar warning receiver erupted in an electronic scream, a cacophony of alarms. Every single air defense system in Western Russia had just detected an enemy fighter jet climbing aggressively into their engagement zone. The nearest S-400 system, located to the southeast of Belgorod, immediately began to paint the MiG with its fire control radar, locking onto it. In a matter of seconds, the system's computers would calculate a firing solution. But the Ukrainian pilot had an advantage, an element of surprise born from audacity. The Russian operators had less than 45 seconds from the moment of detection to the moment they could effectively engage his aircraft. Their standard operating procedures were designed to counter conventional attack profiles. They never, ever expected a Ukrainian jet to attempt something so brazen, so seemingly suicidal. At an altitude of 5,000 meters, the pilot reached the launch apex. The iPad on his dashboard displayed the optimal release parameters. 2 distinct thuds shook the airframe as the AASM hammers detached from the wings. Instantly, he rolled the jet upside down and pulled hard on the stick again, executing a maneuver that would have impressed its inventors from the First World War. The MiG-29 carved a tight arc through the sky, trading its precious altitude for speed as it dived back towards the safety of the low-level flight envelope. Behind him, the 2 smart bombs were now on their own, beginning their deadly journey. Their rocket motors ignited with a brilliant flash, accelerating them along their ballistic arc towards Belgorod. Their GPS receivers locked onto satellite signals, while their inertial navigation systems measured every minute deviation, every subtle shift in motion. The bombs were now autonomous, making hundreds of micro-corrections per second to ensure they would strike their pre-programmed coordinates with absolute precision. The maneuver the pilot had just performed is called toss bombing. It was developed during the Cold War as a method for fighter bombers to deliver nuclear weapons without having to fly directly over their heavily defended targets. The physics are simple. You climb at a steep angle, toss the bomb upwards in a high trajectory, and then turn and flee while the weapon's momentum carries it the rest of the way to the target. Simple in theory, incredibly dangerous in practice, especially against modern integrated air defenses. The Russian response was swift, but ultimately futile. Two interceptor missiles launched from their platforms, streaking into the sky to destroy the MiG-29. But the jet was already gone, back down in the treetops, jinking and weaving as it raced for home. The interceptors, designed to shoot down high-flying bombers, could not track a target that was hugging the terrain. They flew harmlessly overhead, their proximity fuses finding nothing but empty sky. And here lies the critical point. The S-400 system, for all its sophistication, had a fatal flaw when faced with this specific tactic. The system required a sequence of about 10 seconds from initial detection to final engagement when dealing with a low-altitude target that suddenly popped up. First, the search radar had to detect and classify the threat. Then, the fire control radar needed to acquire a lock and develop a firing solution. The missile itself required 3 seconds from the launch command to actually leave the rail. And then, there was the flight time to the target's position. Against a high-altitude bomber or a cruise missile on a predictable path, this sequence worked flawlessly. But against a fighter jet executing a high-speed toss-bombing maneuver, it was catastrophically slow. The pilot released his weapons and was diving back to safety before the S-400 could complete its own kill chain. Worse still, the S-400 was optimized for large aircraft and missiles, not for small guided bombs. Its massive interceptor missiles are designed to obliterate bombers, not to perform the delicate task of intercepting small, precision munitions. In less than 2 minutes, the bombs would reach their destination. The FSB officers inside their Belgorod headquarters had no idea what was coming. Intelligent weapons, guided by invisible satellite signals and launched using technology they couldn't possibly anticipate or stop, were closing in. At 6:27 a.m., the first AASM Hammer punched through the roof of the FSB headquarters. Its fuse, programmed for a 25-millisecond delay, counted down with electronic precision as the warhead plunged through the building's upper structure. Upon detonation, its 87 kilograms of high explosive converted from a solid to a superheated gas in microseconds. The resulting shockwave expanded outwards at 8,000 meters per second, creating overpressures exceeding 200 psi, more than enough to instantly eliminate anyone inside the building. But the physics of destruction were just getting started. The explosion, contained within the building's structure, created a phenomenon known as reflected overpressure. The shockwave bounced off the surviving walls and floors, multiplying its destructive power. Windows didn't just shatter. They exploded outwards in a shower of glass that was later found embedded in buildings 300 meters away. Office furniture became lethal projectiles. Filing cabinets filled with classified documents were turned into shredded metal confetti. The second bomb arrived just 0.3 of a second later, striking a point 20 meters from the first impact. By this time, the building's structural integrity was already fatally compromised. Load-bearing walls had vanished, and support columns were shattered. The second explosion delivered the final blow to the weakened structure. The destruction cascaded through the building in a deadly wave, triggering what engineers call a progressive collapse. Floor by floor, the FSB headquarters began to devour itself. The fourth floor pancaked onto the third, adding its mass to the devastation. Then the fifth floor joined the cascade. Each collapse added more kinetic energy to the disaster. In less than 5 seconds, what had been a 5-story symbol of Russian state security was reduced to a smoldering pile of rubble and secrets. The significance of this attack extends far beyond physical destruction. The FSB is not just an office building, it is the direct successor to the Soviet KGB and a central pillar of Vladimir Putin's regime. This was the first direct strike against Russian intelligence services in the entire war. More importantly, it happened in Belgorod, on Russian soil. Attacks inside Russia carry an immense symbolic weight. They directly challenge the Kremlin's narrative that the special military operation is a distant, professional conflict with no cost to ordinary Russians. When air raid sirens wail and buildings explode in a major Russian city, the war becomes undeniable, immediate, and terrifyingly close to home. This is a deliberate Ukrainian strategy to raise the cost of the war for Russia, forcing Putin to expend political capital and military resources defending his own territory. But perhaps the most fascinating aspect of this entire operation is what it represents: the dawn of a new era in warfare. An era that is not defined by who has the most expensive weapons, but by who is the most creative, the most adaptable, and the most innovative. Ukraine took a 40-year-old fighter jet, integrated it with a $500 tablet, and armed it with million-dollar French bombs to create a capability that successfully challenged one of the most sophisticated air defense systems on the planet. And in a final ironic twist, the mighty S-400 has now become a target itself. Its powerful radars, necessary for its operation, act like giant beacons in the dark, broadcasting their location to Ukrainian electronic intelligence. Russia is now forced to use shorter-range air defense systems to protect the S-400 itself. In other words, the shield now needs its own shield. This incredible story shows that we have entered a new age of asymmetric innovation. An age where smaller, more agile forces can leverage creativity and adaptability to overcome larger, more expensive systems. An era where software and ingenuity can triumph over raw hardware. The future of warfare no longer belongs solely to the superpowers with the largest budgets. It belongs to those who can innovate faster, adapt quicker, and think outside the box. And it all started with an iPad strapped to the dash of a MiG-29.